Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to the second day of WSDS 2020. I hope you slept well. I hope you're feeling all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, as we say in England, like a pack of enthusiastic squirrels. I hope so, because today is a day packed with plenaries. We're going to be hearing from leaders in business, in politics, in sustainability, and particularly we're going to be looking ahead to COP26, the climate talks at the end of the year, which are being hosted by that little small offshore island from which I hail. We're going to have an opening session in a moment. Meanwhile, do make sure you have downloaded the app. You can find it on the App Store, WSDS 2020, and do feel free to tweet. If you tweet at me, I'm Martin Futures, I will retweet you. And now we're just about ready to welcome our opening speakers for the morning. So first of all, to kick us off with his keynote address, please welcome a long-standing friend of TERI, and as of yesterday, the winner of the Sustainable Development Leadership Award 2020, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Come and join us. And to introduce him, please welcome Ambassador Manjeev Puri, member of the advisory board of TERI.
Thank you so much, Martin.
I think it's to you.
So, Martin, it's over to me?
Yes.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. We were told, please wait 10 minutes because the crowd is kind of moving in. Right? Take it that it's all in except the front rows, which is very common in schools and colleges in India. Nobody wants to sit in the front rows. I don't know how it is in Columbia, Professor.
Exactly the same.
Great. Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I want you to give a very big hand to Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
Thank you.
He is not only the awardee this year, but I want to tell you, in various ways, the word sustainability and sustainable development wouldn't perhaps have been there and certainly wouldn't have been in the global mind had it not been for him. Professor Sachs, this is not only something to do with his academic pursuits, his ability to think, but I'll say it has something to do with geopolitics. Professor Sachs lives in New York. New York is the home of the United Nations. These two things didn't happen together. They were not caused by one another, but this coincidence cannot not be forgotten. And Professor Sachs has taken full advantage, 3 times or advisor to 3 Secretary Generals, the founder of the Earth Institute at Columbia, indeed the person who perhaps has brought the idea of sustainability and sustainable development into the global minds. Ajay, yesterday in the talk with Jairam Ramesh and Lord Adair Turner, you referred a lot to the idea of internalization. Would you agree with me that much of this internalization wouldn't have happened or would have happened many years later if sustainable development had not been, and climate, had not been on the United Nations agenda? Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to structure today's session around an address by Professor Sachs. He will speak for about 30 minutes. I'm told we have till 10:30. Is that right, Annapurna? 10:30? Yeah. So that gives us about 45 minutes, sir. And then we'll take questions. And I would really like all of you to be active in asking questions. I was telling Professor Sachs that those who come here and sit on the stage, they are invariably convinced of their own positions. They've thought through them and are unlikely to change. Most of you sitting in the audience have a bias, and I believe it's a bias in favor of sustainable development. What we can do from here and what our lead speakers can do is to steel you in your resolve, and you matter. Therefore, as far as I'm concerned, his speaking today is going to make the greatest difference, including to WSDS 2020. Professor Sachs, I'm very delighted. Before I ask you to speak, let me leave one question with you. Could you also address for us the geopolitics between uptown New York and midtown New York?
Oh my God.
The floor is yours, sir.
I thought I had an easy topic, which was global sustainable development, but New York politics may be beyond me. I will do my best, Ambassador, but it's a great honor to be on the stage with you, and I'd like to thank TERI for this wonderful event, and again, for the great honor yesterday. And the first rule of a classroom also is, since students don't sit in the front row, I get to call on people in the back row, which means be ready with questions and discussion. I'm going to talk about the global dynamics of the climate change debate and the relevance for India. I think India has been an ambivalent global player on the issue of climate change. On the one side, recognizing that it's important to do something about it. On the other hand, not being really in the leadership of action to this point. I think that this is a mistake. This country absolutely depends on a global solution to climate change. It's one of the most vulnerable places in the planet to the climate changes that are underway, and it has huge stakes in the success of the global venture. I want to put those propositions succinctly and then explain as clearly as I can in a short period of time what I think should be done. Well, we are in the midst of dramatic environmental changes, as you know. 2019 was the second warmest year on record. The last 5 years, 2015 to 2019, are the 5 warmest years in instrument record. Temperatures are rising between 0.2 and 0.4 degrees C per decade now. We have already warmed the planet by 1.2 degrees Celsius. And mind you, the Paris Agreement calls for limiting the rise of temperature to well below 2 degrees and aiming for 1.5 degrees as the upper limit. And we're almost there. The temperatures today on our planet are higher than at any time during the entire history of civilization. As far as the climate scientists can tell us, there has never been a decade in the last 10,000 years as warm as we are today. This is almost certainly the case looking at century averages over the last 10,000 years. It's dramatic what is happening. This is a graph showing the last 10,000 years of temperature, and the red line at the end is the spike of temperatures in the last 100 years. And you can see that we've now reached a temperature higher than during the entire Holocene. That is the 10,000 years since the end of the last ice age, the whole period of civilization. 2019, as in all recent years, was another year of mega climate disasters all over the planet. Forest fires, massive typhoons, massive floods all over the world. India was hit by every possible shock, and the extreme nature of this crisis is absolutely lived in India's reality now, year to year. Temperatures reached 50 degrees C in Rajasthan. This will become a commonplace in the years ahead. The heat wave in India was the worst in modern history. The flooding was massive. The water crisis intense. Droughts and floods beset this country in 2019 at a massive scale. I would say there is no place in the world more vulnerable to climate change than India at a large scale, given the fact that this is a country of 1.4 billion people, soon 1.7 billion people, that is tropical or subtropical, with massive hydrologic challenges, massive areas of populations vulnerable to flooding, vulnerable to droughts, and certainly vulnerable to extreme temperatures, which are becoming commonplace in this country. There are other places in the world extraordinarily vulnerable, to be sure. There are small island economies that will disappear. But no place at the scale of India faces this vulnerability. This is true even of Africa, which is more sparsely populated. The density of population combined with the vulnerability to climate-related disasters in this country is unique. If I were you, I would be screaming at the top of my lungs for global action. That is not happening. What's happening instead is the government saying, well, it's important, but don't push on us, it's not really our thing, and so on. This is not an appropriate kind of response to this emergency for this country. This country has every right to make demands on the rest of the world, but they should be clear, forthright, and in the context of strong action by this country. The evidence is we are accelerating in warming. My colleague, James Hansen, who I regard as the world's greatest climate scientist, has noted that if you strip out the interannual variations of the El Nino cycle, we have recently seen an acceleration of warming above the 0.2 degrees C per decade that we've experienced in the last 3 decades, and that arguably we are even above 0.3 degrees C per decade warming at this stage. So there was reason for alarm already in recent years. There's reason for even greater alarm with the new evidence. As Professor Hansen and a growing chorus of paleoclimatologists are noting, we've already reached CO2 concentrations that are consistent with a multi-meter rise of sea levels, not the 1 meter that the IPCC talks about, which will be dramatic enough because it will lead to chronic flooding of hundreds of millions of habitations by mid-century on a regular basis. But multi-meter, when Earth was this warm most recently, which was 115,000 years ago in the previous interglacial period, the sea level was 8 meters higher than today. Think of that. The world economy, not by coincidence, and the world's largest cities, not by coincidence, are built on the coastlines of the world. I live on a small island economy called Manhattan, and New York is not alone. It is actually the rule, not the exception, of the major cities being built on the coasts. What we've seen of the destruction of Venice this year will become the destruction of major cities all over the world on the course that we are on. We're also seeing other greenhouse gases rising, not only the carbon dioxide from fossil fuels, which is the main source of our warming, but we're seeing methane rise as well. It's not even understood why. It may be a feedback effect, a natural feedback effect from the warming that is already underway. Now, what does this mean in terms of public policy if we are able in the end to prove Aristotle's hypothesis that we are a rational species? We've not yet proved that. But if we are able to prove it, what does it call on us to do? Well, you said some nice words about my work in sustainable development. The fact of the matter is, this is more than 40 years now of attempting to get the world, not by me, by tremendous numbers of thoughtful and brilliant people trying to get the world steered towards sanity, towards self-survival. And we haven't succeeded. I'm just a follower in this. The scientists have pointed this out now for decades, that we're on a course of self-destruction. And they're right. And we've known the basic facts of global warming for more than a century. And then event after event has confirmed these realities. The first conference globally on sustainable development, though the term was not yet in circulation, was 1972 in Stockholm, when it was recognized that economic growth and the environment were on a collision course. Nearly 50 years ago. In 1992, 28 years ago, we had the Rio Earth Summit, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change was adopted. What came out of that? Nothing in practice. We have continued our same ways, our dependence on fossil fuels and other greenhouse gases, almost unabated since 1992. In Paris in 2015, the world agreed to try to implement the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. 21 years of meetings after the first meeting when that treaty went into force in 1995. And what did the Paris Climate Agreement say? It said as the basic point of that agreement that we must keep warming well below 2 degrees Celsius and aim to keep it below 1.5 degrees C. Then the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change explained in a comprehensive report that there's also a world of difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees warming, because even 2 degrees is likely to trigger massive positive feedbacks and threshold effects that could be devastating, as well as the obvious fact that the damages from droughts, floods, extreme storms, emerging diseases are highly nonlinear in their response to rises of temperatures. So the IPCC screamed again, stay below 1.5 degrees C. And it explained clearly what needs to be done to do that. And that is what's shown in this graph. We need to reduce CO2 emissions to net zero by 2050 at the latest. This is the basic bottom line to remember. We must decarbonize the world economy by 2050. That is a mere 30 years for massive global change. We are likely to fail in this, of course. And when we fail, we are likely to see dire and dramatic consequences, of course. But we need not fail because it's feasible to achieve this goal. It's just extraordinarily difficult to bring about the global cooperation for success. The fact of the matter is, what this graph shows is the reduction to zero of what's needed in emissions. And what this graph shows is the actual trend in emissions up until now, upward to this moment. We have been talking about this issue intensively for 28 years since the Rio Summit. We've achieved nothing, ladies and gentlemen, in changing the curve. Don't have any illusion. The curve is rising. The emissions are rising. The idea of progress is a lie because it is not happening yet. Now, why isn't it happening? Mainly because a few countries that have most of the fossil fuels don't act. Or because they do act with a massive expansion of fossil fuel use. Of course, the major increase of emissions in the last 25 years has come from China, with its booming coal-based economy. And China became the #1 emitter in the world, about 28% of CO2 emissions. The United States, about half of that. Though because China is 4 times the population of the United States, the per capita emissions in the US are twice China's, total emissions half of China's. But the US and China alone account for more than 40% of the world's emissions. India has much, much lower emissions per capita, but they're rising because India is also a coal-based economy, and it remains committed to coal to this day. And so we've not turned the curve. It's worthwhile understanding the basic political economy of this. Let me just say that the most important factor in a country or region's policy is how much fossil fuel it has on its territory. Not what its options are, not what could actually be done, but whether or not it has fossil fuels and how much. So the European Union is blessed with few fossil fuels. Thank God. It's one of the few regions that basically doesn't have fossil fuels, partly because it used them up in the first industrial revolution. And second, it is lucky not to have too much oil. Oil is just a curse. It drives leaders crazy. My country is evidence #1. So the European Union has low fossil fuel production per capita. It's an importer of fossil fuels. It has moderate renewable energy potential. It is highly vulnerable to climate change, and it is the only region of the world truly committed to decarbonization right now. And the European Green Deal, announced by the European Council last month, is the most important single political breakthrough on the global scene now. India is a relatively low fossil fuel producing country. You have coal, but you also have a lot of people, so the denominator is very large relative to the coal. You're a net fuel importer. You have moderate renewable energy potential, enough. This country is extremely vulnerable to climate change, I would say the most in the world. And yet the national politics are divided about what to do. China has moderate per capita fossil fuel production, a lot more coal per capita than India. It's also a net importer of fossil fuels, of oil and gas. It's got moderate renewable energy potential. It has high, not extreme, vulnerability to climate change. And it's also divided politically on what to do. Then there are the countries of high fossil fuel production: Russia, the Gulf countries, the United States, Canada, and Australia. Every one of them is a status quo country politically. They're not changing. They may talk about change, but they're not changing. Russia wants to export its gas. The Gulf wants to export its oil and gas. The United States would like to export every fossil fuel. If Trump had his way, he'd blow up the planet by himself in terms of climate. Truly sociopathic. Canada and Australia are also bad behaviors because they want to maximize their fossil fuel exports as well. It's amazing, the case of Australia. This is a near desert country with a thin sliver of habitability, with great ecosystem vulnerability, mega forest fires, destruction of the Great Barrier Reef. Massive flooding, massive droughts, massive heat waves, and yet it doesn't act. Why? Because of coal, because of political corruption, because of Rupert Murdoch. Because when you have these fossil fuels, they poison the mind. They make it so blind to our own survival that you have a country that is aflame, and yet it can't get its act together to utter an honest sentence. Shame on Morrison. But he is simply symptomatic of how this works. I see it in my own country, and I'll explain that a little bit more in a moment. So Europe is the only place right now of a major country actually on the right track. I credit European leaders for this, but I mostly credit the absence of fossil fuels in Europe for this. Because that is the thing that has clarified the mind. We actually need a series of regional green deals. North America, South America, EU, CIS, the Arab region, South Asia, ASEAN, Northeast Asia, and the African Union. This is the only thing that can save this planet, is regional cooperation around rapid decarbonization. Any region torn asunder like this one is by politics will fail. Your success will depend on cooperation with Pakistan and with the neighbors, because that's how renewable energy works, that's how ecosystems work. A region that is in the midst of, oh my God, the threats of war, the language of war, will never focus to save itself. We need regional agreements. Why regional? At least 3 reasons. First, renewable energy is geographically concentrated and therefore needs to be shared across borders. It's intermittent, so we need grids that extend across national boundaries. And third, regions, that means transnational regions, share critical biomes, riversheds, fisheries, and other absolutely vital ecological realities. You must cooperate with neighbors, or else ecosystems will be destroyed. Well, I gave a little example, I won't dwell on it, but the idea is, imagine 2 regions, each of which has wind power half the time, completely anti-correlated. It's windy one place, still the other place. If each one tries to make renewable energy decarbonization on its own, you need storage for half your energy use. If you simply have a connected grid, you don't even need storage, because you have the same size production, but you share in the in the moments when you are not producing, you're drawing the power from your neighbor. And so geographically dispersed renewable energy is vital for success and efficiency. Cooperate with your neighbors. What are the technological pathways to success? Very quickly. We need zero carbon electricity. This is the core of everything. Power should be generated with zero carbon. Then electrify everything possible. Buildings, transport, and industry. Make a smart grid. Produce synthetic fuels out of renewable energy. Strong energy efficiency, like A.J. Mathur has led in this country brilliantly, because that solves problems if you have energy efficiency. Manage land use sustainably, and have justice in the transition. Just to say, there are easier sectors and harder sectors to solve. About 75%, and Lord Adair Turner has done great work on this, are relatively straightforward to solve. About 25% require more complex solutions. One of the solutions is synthetic fuels made by renewable energy. I don't have time to go into it, but we can make synthetic liquids, we can make synthetic methane, we can also make hydrogen out of renewable energy or out of coal with carbon capture and storage that then are clean burning fuels. So there are solutions. It's been shown in the academic literature now repeatedly that we could move to 100% renewable grid by 2050. I'm sorry, to complete decarbonization by 2050. Please know that. Look it up. I will leave references. A recent paper that I like very much shows what a world energy system completely decarbonized would look like. It would basically be a solar system with a little bit of wind in the northern latitudes. But solar power by itself irradiates the planet roughly 5,000 times our power use. Solar energy, with the dramatic drop of costs of photovoltaics and battery storage, mean that we can essentially run the world economy on solar plus smaller amounts of wind, ocean, hydro, geothermal, and other zero energy sources. Of course, there would be vast benefits of this decarbonization as well. When I looked out the window this morning, well, it was a typical Delhi morning. I couldn't see anything. And when I looked at the air quality index this morning, it's the worst in the world here and in China by far. It was 239 in the neighborhood this morning in the air quality index. This is killing millions of people in this country. It's just mind-boggling that this is not addressed as a matter of national emergency by itself, much less in tandem with renewable energy and decarbonization. This shows the places where, in this particular article, solar dominates, that's the yellow, and where wind dominates, that's the high latitudes where the winds blow more strongly. The evidence is this is not even costly to make this transition. Maybe at the top 1% of world output per year between now and 2050 to avoid disaster. And this is a illustration from a Chinese project, Global Energy Interconnection Development Cooperation Organization, which shows rightly that having an interconnected grid through Asia is part of the solution. That requires cooperation. The United States is against cooperation because it aims to be a hegemonic power. So it is in favor of divide and conquer, the ancient imperial strategy. It's trying to fight a trade war with China. This is nearly insane. Not surprising given our politics, but nuts. Cooperate, I'm telling you. Do not divide. And we're one more war away from complete and utter disaster. Even if the war itself didn't do us in, which it most likely would, it would distract us to make it impossible to solve these problems. Cooperate with China. Don't listen to the garbage from the United States. It's reckless, it's dangerous, and it's the interest of the American empire, which is no real interest at all. Who wants to live in an empire? Cooperate on the Silk Road project as well, because we need to upgrade infrastructure and make it sustainable throughout Eurasia. Well, I go on to talk about how to make policies for this decarbonization, but the main way is regulatory. Stop licensing coal-fired power plants. only allow expansion of capacity of zero carbon energy. Declare that by 2030, all new vehicles sold in this country will be electric vehicles. This is clear. Economists want to put carbon taxes and blah, blah, blah. It's not right. You will not get the changes needed at the pace that's needed, aside from direct regulation that says we're moving to decarbonization by 2050. So, what's really going on is the status quo countries, the United States, Canada, Russia, China, India, the Gulf, Australia, Indonesia account for 3/4 of the fossil fuel production in the world. China and India together, which account for 40% of the world's population, have a phenomenal stake and will be the determinants of the future. They have no business being on the status quo list, because your country and China are not fossil fuel powers. Even the employment in the coal industry in this country is at most 1/10 of 1% of the labor force of this country. This is a small matter in terms of jobs of the future.
Professor Sachs.
Almost nothing. Almost finished.
Yeah.
Sorry. Get off of the status quo and understand my country. The United States is a completely corrupt political system. Have no doubt about it. Our Senate, you watch the senators these days, they look like zombies. But they're not. They're just corrupt. Why? Because they're on the take for campaign contributions. Because they want their jobs, so they take handouts from the oil and gas industry. The oil and gas industry is the major lobby in the United States. They are reckless, selfish, short-sighted. The Republican Party is essentially owned and operated by the oil industry. And they're the ones that told Donald Trump, pull out of the climate agreement. He's sociopathic enough to do it, but they are corrupt enough to ask. And that's how it worked. 90% of the contributions of this industry go to the Republican Party. Let me just tell you, though, that investing in fossil fuels is a lousy, stupid business. This is an industry on the way out. So if you look at the Standard & Poor's over the last 5 years, it went up 11.7% per year. Coal went down 2.7% during this period. Fracking investments down 11%. This is on the US exchanges. Oil services down 16%. Investing in low carbon up 8%. But the lobbies have determined the policy. By the way, the American people are not as stupid as our politicians make us look. About 80% of Americans are on the right side of this issue now. This is corruption, not public opinion in the United States.
Professor Sachs.
So just to stop, here are the 10 rules that I would like to suggest to you. Stop all new coal plants, period. Every coal plant you build will either kill people with air pollution, destroy the climate, or have to be scrapped. Second, stop new oil and gas exploration, because we have more than enough in the world. We're going to have to strand the oil and gas assets, keep them underground. Stop new fracking. This is an absurd activity. It's high cost, it loses money, It is not a stepping stone fuel. Natural gas is not a stepping stone to anything but disaster. That's just propaganda of the oil industry. Stop new oil and gas pipelines. Stop new deforestation. Shift to battery electric vehicles by 2030. Invest in hydrogen and synthetic liquids. Divest from greenhouse gas emitting companies. That's a good investment. Restrain the oil companies and pro-carbon governments. Tell the truth to the United States government. They're acting, I believe that these are crimes against humanity, pulling out of the Paris Agreement. Nothing less than that. It's a kind of psychopathy. And interconnect renewables. That means cooperate with your neighbors. Thank you very much.
Jeffrey, please say.
Thanks.
Professor Sachs, it isn't for nothing that you are known as Mr. Sustainability.
I'm
10
trying.
commandments for all of you here. Jeffrey, I would like to open the questions to the floor, but before that, I want to make 2 quick points. A, I didn't hear the word adaptation at all. I lived through New York on Superstorm Sandy, and if it struck any other place other than Manhattan, there would have been disaster all around. Secondly, what if I provoke you by saying that all that you've said is actually to speak the language of the United States, which is all of us do everything, and let's just call the United States a bad name. Think about this. It's all very well to say that we should become the menu. It's all very well to say that. But I do think that without the greatest economic and technological powerhouse of the world being strongly on board, and so therefore I go back to my original point which I made to you. I wish the politics and the pressure of uptown persuaded midtown New York. The floor is yours, sir. I'm sorry, I really can't see anyone. Gentlemen there.
No.
We'll take 2 quick questions. Sir, you, and then yourself, sir. Can we start with the gentleman in the blue color coat?
Professor Sachs, Ambassador Puri. I'm an undergraduate student from university. Off and on, we've seen that in a conflicted region and in post-conflict reconstruction phase, the reconstruction of infrastructure takes place on the nearest, cheapest available resource, which at times could be coal as well. Do you recommend that the conflict that is happening in the Gulf right now or in South America right now, should the government focus on reconstructing environment first and then infrastructure, or what should be the entire reconstruction phase timeline?
Thank you. Sir, why don't we take another question? Because I think we have about 2 minutes left, 3 minutes left.
Professor Sachs, today is a Gandhi's Martyrs' Day, and I have been to Rajghat before coming here. Indeed, I mean, you have done lifelong work, and I met you before. I think it is a time, enough is enough. And economic growth or development and sustainability are oxymorons. Simply they cannot go on. The challenge before the world is to build an ecological civilization. And unless the political economy and the political processes globally get out of this syndrome of madness of economic growth. And I don't agree with, respectfully with the chair, there is no technological fix or technological solution. Problem is societal. And that societal problem can come from what Gandhi's here generic. Problem in one word is a lifestyle. And if Gandhi were around today, he would say all the 10 that you said, certainly he will endorse, but stop the stupid fossil fuel, keep it in ground, don't allow this demon even a little to come out. I think that is the pathway for humanity. I mean, the time is not to make an idea a catharsis, but if we were to go from here, answer is very simple. There is enough for everyone's need, but not for greed.
Thank you.
I think
Thank you, sir.
science and technology and politics of the day is nothing but the greed. Let us tell truth to the powers that be.
Thank you very much, sir. I think we are kind of running out of time. We'll take 2 quick observations or questions. The lady there, just behind you, sir. The gentleman here, I'm sorry for the others, I just can't seem to see you all. So please, quickly, if you don't mind.
Thank you so much. This is Dapalina Sengupta from Texas A&M Energy Institute. I live in the energy capital of the world, which is Texas. My question to you, you have talked about keep the fossil fuels in the ground, but for making our batteries, we need to still dig up for the rare earth metals. And the American Chemical Society has said that we are going to run out of the rare earth metals by 2050, which is much sooner than our fossil fuels. So what are your thoughts on that?
Good question, ma'am. Nice technical poser to him. Sir,
I am Ajit Kumar, founder Khushigram, working on sustainable developments on ground in the community.
great.
My small and simple point, we don't have much time, so I'll say, why don't we devise a simple footprint where we measure not only the countries and states and districts and villages, but individuals, so footprints of everybody, and then we accordingly have disincentives or incentives for that. Thank you.
Well said. I think the per capita measure is something that we've been pushing on. But as things currently stand, can you imagine, sir, the lectures on lifestyle are being given by those who've grandfathered everything to those who haven't made anything as yet. I want to give one chance to our newly minted and discovered star anchor, Ajay Mathur. This is for those of you who weren't here yesterday. Please, something for the Director General. And then, sir, it's your turn.
Jeff, quick question. In your list of geopolitical orientation, where would you place Japan?
Professor Sachs.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Let me say, I think Gandhi's fundamental point really is about greed. Like you said, we cannot succeed unless we calm our minds a bit and focus on what we need to do to stay alive. And it is basically the madness of greed that prevents us from doing that. Now, let me make another point, though, that I think is also important. We have 7.7 billion people on the planet today. Every day, those people need clean water, sanitation, access to health care, and other basics of life, much less the amenities of life. That does require technological solutions. And we need to make sure that we are not going to create a disaster in this transition, because we would strand billions of people in doing that. So I think that the most important fact is clearing our heads about these realities. And politics is not about clear thinking these days. Politics is about greed and power interacting. And it's corrupted in most places in the world. This struggle for power at all costs is absolutely reckless. I want to remind you that in the Western philosophical thought, Aristotle and Plato viewed politics as how to govern for the common good how to govern for well-being. We have lost that basic point. We're in a complete struggle for power, fueled by madness and greed. And this is giving rise to absolutely mentally unstable leaders like Trump. And I want to point out, because I know people like him, and some people do, and that he's coming here, he is the most dangerous president we have had in our history. Have no doubt about it. And I'm not making a partisan point. I'm making a point for survival. He is a danger every day that he is president. And this is a fact, and it's a very sad one. It's not a pleasure to say it, by the way. It is not a pleasure to say it. It is a reflection of at least my trying to communicate to you how dangerous the world is right now. We have 6,400 nuclear warheads on top of everything else in the United States. You have a lot of nuclear warheads also. Our leaders should not be talking about war any day.
Professor Sachs,
So now let me just say a word about some of the other points. The main thing that is needed is thinking. It's a plan. What is the plan of this country? What is a plan to decarbonize? And then you can address issues of infrastructure, environment, and so forth. This requires expertise and dialogue, but it requires a plan. That's why economists are wrong to say put on a carbon tax. This is a nonsense compared to the complexity of this issue. We need a plan that will guide us to zero by 2050. In that context of a plan, things like a carbon tax can play a role, but a subsidiary role to thinking. What is the strategy? What is the grid? What kind of energy system will this country have? How will it transform? Where are the rare earths going to come from to make the photovoltaics and to make the lithium-ion batteries and to make the flow batteries and so forth? Of course we're going to need them. And of course, it's actually strategic for India to ask that question, where are the batteries going to come from? You're going to need hundreds of millions of batteries. Where's the capacity to produce that? I would not leave that just to China or to the United States or to Europe. It is a strategic question, so plan for it. But we're not even thinking in this world. And I go to every climate meeting. These are not thinking meetings. There's no engineering at these meetings. There's no serious planning at these meetings. Diplomats will not solve this problem. We need diplomats to calm our politicians. But we really need engineers to help direct the solutions to these problems. So there are many technical issues, but most of all, we need a framework. And I can tell you from hundreds of academic studies, such a framework can be made. And the outline that I gave of it is a synthesis of really dozens of studies. There's no shortage of ways to do this. On the question of Japan and its position, every country has its particularities. Japan was powered by nuclear until Fukushima. And now there is absolutely a public rebellion against nuclear power. And the government's not figured out an alternative course. Japan is not the greatest sunshine country of the world, so solar is not great. It's got some hydro, it's got some geothermal, it's got some solar, it's got some wind, but it doesn't have a plan. And so they don't know what to do. And in the meantime, they're just relying on fossil fuels, which is no plan at all in reality. One idea is to move more to a hydrogen economy based on clean hydrogen produced by, for example, coal plus carbon capture and storage. But they would be importing the hydrogen, for example, from Australia. But the fact of the matter is they do not have a plan, and they don't have an easy alternative on this. We are going to a crucial meeting worldwide in November, COP26. Why is it crucial? It is crucial because under the Paris Climate Agreement, every 5 years, countries are supposed to put forward more ambitious contributions, so-called. The first round of contributions was completely inadequate. You add them up, and as the UN Environment Program has shown, they add up to more than 3 degrees Celsius warming by the end of the century. In other words, they're baby steps. This is probably the last COP where countries can put forward meaningful plans to mid-century to actually achieve the 1.5 degree goal. I wouldn't bet on it, but I would do everything to work towards trying to make it a success. And the problem is that with Trump in office, having pulled the United States out of Paris, it is deliberately designed to disempower those who would move faster. It is a kind of madness. History, as long as we don't blow ourselves up, we will have history. History will record that this was the worst administration the United States has ever had. And that's why we have to do something about it. So I would advise you get to a serious plan, and we will do our politics in the United States, and we will meet in November successfully. That's the plan.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you for making your pitch. In the absence of any better system, I think democracy is the best. We must listen to the voices of people in your country, in my country, and we must believe that everybody wants to have a better world and a better place for himself.
And I would
And
add,
let me leave one
Ambassador,
thought.
just to say, if we listen to the American people, we'd have no problem.
I have absolutely no doubt about it, and I believe that in some senses we are listening. Let me leave a thought with all of you. Professor Sachs talked about the COP taking place later in this year. I would leave a thought with all of you. The COP in 2025, the 25th COP, perhaps, is the one which will be really the defining COP. I want to thank you very much, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. You're wonderful. And please carry on with your passion.
Thank you.
You are an absolute must for the world. Thank you.